30 years of silence were not enough to extinguish the truth. A box, a letter, and a shared memory reopen wounds and possibilities. Because sometimes only a brave mind can take the first step toward reconciliation. The warm wind of Santa Fe raised small swirls of ochre dust in the main plaza, while Matthew Sanders contemplated the pink facade of the church. 32 years had passed since the last time his eyes had gazed upon that parish where, as a child, his mother took him every Sunday. The same parish where at 22 he had waited in vain for Carla Monroe on the day they had agreed to run away together. His fingers, now hardened by decades of woodworking, caressed the yellowed envelope he carried in his shirt pocket. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago at his workshop in Portland, a trembling but unmistakable handwriting. "I'm waiting where time stood still, Ellen." At 54, Matthew never imagined that a piece of paper could reopen a wound he thought had healed. Ellen Fletcher, Carla's younger sister, the little girl with long braids who watched them from the window when they met secretly in the backyard of the Fletcher home. The same girl who, years later, was the only one who had the courage to tell him why Carla never showed up that Sunday in April. The clock on the tower struck 4. Exactly the same time he had arrived that afternoon, more than 3 decades ago, with a small suitcase and a heart overflowing with dreams. He carried a simple ring in his pocket and the promise of a life away from the stern gaze of Carla's father, who had sworn that he would never allow his daughter to marry a simple carpenter with no future. Matthew took a deep breath. The scent of jacaranda blossoms reminded him that April had always been a month of rebirths and farewells. He approached one of the benches in the plaza and sat down, observing each woman who passed. What would Ellen look like now? The last time he saw her, she was barely 15, a sad-eyed teenager who had found him waiting in the rain after 3 hours in front of the church. "She's not coming, Matthew," she had told him that afternoon, her voice breaking. "They put her in a car this morning. My father discovered everything." Those words had been like knives, but what came next was worse. "They sent her to Denver, to my Aunt Dorothy's. Dad says she'll stay there until the baby is born." The world had stopped in that instant. A baby. His baby. And no one had told him. For weeks he sought ways to contact her, to reach her, but the Fletcher family was powerful in Santa Fe. Mr. August Fletcher, with his political connections and his money, had blocked every attempt. Even when Matthew managed to get to Denver, months later, only to find out that Carla was no longer there. She went to New York City, they told him, and so began a years-long search that ended in nothing but ghosts and rumors. Over time, hope diluted like watercolor in the rain. Matthew left for Portland, where an uncle offered him work in his cabinet-making shop. There he immersed himself in the craft of creating beauty with his hands, while his heart hardened like the wood he carved day after day. He eventually married, to a good woman who never asked too much about the nights when she found him looking out the window with moist eyes. They had 2 children who now had their own lives. And when Josephine, his wife, passed away 5 years ago, Matthew believed he had already experienced all possible emotions in a lifetime, until Ellen's letter arrived. Matthew? Matthew Sanders? The female voice pulled him from his memories. Looking up, he saw a woman with short hair and silver streaks framing a face that, although marked by the years, retained the same intensity in her gaze that he remembered. Ellen. She nodded with a shy smile. She wore a simple turquoise dress and a white shawl over her shoulders. In her hands, a small worn leather purse. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said, sitting beside him. "I thought the same during the entire trip," he confessed, as he felt his heart beating with a forgotten urgency. "Why now, Ellen? After so many years?" Ellen turned her gaze toward the church, her hands, slightly trembling, intertwined on her lap. "Carla died, Matthew." The words fell between them like stones in a pond, creating invisible ripples that altered the air. 2 months ago, Ellen continued, her voice almost breaking. "Cancer, it was quick at least, she didn't suffer too much." Matthew closed his eyes. He had imagined this moment many times over the years. He had mentally rehearsed what he would feel, what he would say. But now, faced with reality, there was only a strange emptiness, as if he had just lost something that he had actually been without for decades. "I'm sorry," he murmured, not knowing exactly why he was apologizing or to whom. "Before she died," Ellen continued, opening her purse, "she asked me to find you, to give you this." From her purse she extracted a small carved wooden box. Seeing it, Matthew felt the ground beneath his feet disappear. He had made that box. It was his first gift to Carla when they were just beginning to see each other in secret. He had carved intertwined initials on the lid, a C and an M, joined by a delicate vine of flowers. With trembling hands, he took the box. It felt lighter than he remembered. "She didn't open it in my presence," Ellen explained. "She said it was something between you and her, something you needed to see." The silence between them grew, loaded with unasked questions and answers postponed for decades. Around them, the plaza continued with its usual rhythm. Tourists taking photographs, vendors offering crafts, children chasing each other amidst laughter. "There's something else you should know, Matthew," Ellen finally said, her voice firm but charged with emotion. "You have a daughter." The world stopped again, just like that Sunday in April more than 30 years ago. "Her name is Lucy," Ellen continued amid Matthew's stunned silence. "She's 31 years old. She's a literature professor at the National University, and she has your same eyes, Matthew. Those eyes that can see the soul of things." A choked sound escaped from Matthew's throat. It wasn't a sob, it wasn't an exclamation. It was the sound of something breaking and healing at the same time. Does she know who I am?" Ellen gently shook her head. "Carla never told her about you until recently. She told her you were a youthful love that couldn't be, that circumstances separated you. She didn't tell her about my father or about how they took her away from you." "And where is she now, Lucy?" Ellen's eyes lit up with a mixture of sadness and hope. "She's here in Santa Fe. She came with me, but she asked for space. She's at the hotel waiting. It depends on you whether you want to meet her or not." Matthew looked at the box in his hands. Carefully, like someone afraid of awakening sleeping ghosts, he lifted the lid. Inside was a yellowed paper folded with precision, and underneath, a photograph. He took it delicately. It was a young woman of about 20, standing in front of a library with books in her arms and a smile that was painfully familiar. She had Carla's dark hair, but her eyes, Ellen was right, they were his eyes. Suddenly, all the decades of absence, all the unanswered questions, all the contained pain, crystallized into a single overwhelming certainty. There was a part of him walking in the world, breathing, feeling, living. A daughter he never knew, and who now, by some impossible twist of fate, was just minutes away. He unfolded the letter with clumsy fingers that seemed to have forgotten their skill for delicate work. Carla's handwriting, more mature than he remembered, but with those same curved strokes that once drew love letters, hidden between the pages of borrowed books. "Dear Matthew, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer in this world, and Ellen has kept her promise. There are so many things I should tell you. So many explanations I owe you, but words were always more your domain than mine. I never forgot you, not a single day. Even when I married years later, a good man who accepted Lucy as his own. A part of my heart still kept your memory like a hidden treasure. My father destroyed us both out of pride and prejudice. When he found out I was pregnant, his anger was so great that I feared not only for myself, but also for you. He had you followed for weeks. His men had orders to teach you a lesson if you tried to contact me. I was a prisoner in my aunt's house with no way to communicate with you. After Lucy's birth, they gave me an ultimatum. Either I gave her up for adoption, or I accepted the marriage proposal from Gregory Mendoza, the son of one of my father's associates, who for some reason I never understood, was willing to marry me despite my dishonor, as my father called it. I couldn't part with our daughter, Matthew. I couldn't. So I accepted the marriage on the condition that they would never ever separate me from Lucy. We lived in New York City for years. Gregory wasn't a bad husband, but there was never love. Just respect and with time a resigned friendship. He died 10 years ago. And since then I've lived with the weight of my cowardice. I should have looked for you. I should have fought harder. But fear and shame paralyzed me. Our daughter is wonderful, Matthew. Brilliant, compassionate, with your sensitivity to see beauty where others only see the ordinary. She doesn't know about you, but I think she has always felt that a piece was missing from her story. I told her about you recently, without going into details. I told her you were my first love and that circumstances separated us. She asked if you might ever meet. I didn't promise anything, but I kept hope. I ask for your forgiveness, though I know I have no right. I ask that, if you find the will in your heart, you meet Lucy. Not to amend the past, which is now immutable, but so that the future might have some of the light that was denied to us. Always yours, in this and all possible worlds, Carla. Tears were flowing freely down Matthew's face when he finished reading. He didn't bother to wipe them away. They were tears that had been waiting decades to be shed. Ellen waited in silence, respecting this sacred moment of reconnection with a past that never had the chance to be lived. I never knew, Matthew finally murmured, all these years thinking she had simply abandoned me, that perhaps she never loved me enough. My father was a monster of pride, Matthew, Ellen said bitterly. He destroyed Carla's life to maintain appearances, and mine too, in his way. He never forgave me for telling you the truth that day. He sent me to a boarding school in Boston the following week. Why didn't you look for me before? Matthew asked with no reproach in his voice, just genuine curiosity. I tried 15 years ago. I went to Portland. I saw you with your wife and children in the park one Sunday. You seemed happy. I didn't have the courage to burst into your life with ghosts from the past. Matthew nodded, understanding. His mind traveled at full speed between memories and possibilities, between the pain of what was lost and the unexpected opportunity that opened before him. Do you want to meet her? Ellen asked softly. More than anything in the world, Matthew responded, with a certainty that surprised even himself. Ellen smiled, taking out her phone. I'll send her a message. She's at the cafe across from the garden. She didn't want to come with me. She was afraid. Afraid of imposing her presence if you didn't want to meet her. While Ellen wrote the message, Matthew carefully put the letter and the photograph back in the box. His heart was beating strongly, as if he had regained years of youth in a matter of minutes. She says she's coming over, Ellen announced, putting away her phone. She's nervous. So am I, Matthew confessed with a trembling smile. The following minutes passed in a strange suspension of time. Ellen told him snippets of Lucy's life, her brilliant studies, her passion for literature, especially poetry, her recent divorce from a brief marriage, her desire to write a book someday. She works with wood like you, Ellen mentioned with a knowing smile. She makes small sculptures. Carla always said it was like seeing you when she concentrated on carving something. Matthew felt a pang of pride mixed with pain for everything he hadn't been able to witness. The first steps, the first words, the birthdays, the graduations, an entire life of irretrievable moments. Aunt Ellen? The female voice made them both look up, and there she was. Not the young woman from the photograph, but an adult woman, with her hair gathered in a casual ponytail and a simple olive green dress. She wore a small silver necklace from which hung what appeared to be a small figure carved in wood. She stopped a few steps away, with uncertainty painted on her face. Her eyes, Matthew's eyes, fixed on the man sitting next to her aunt. Lucy, Ellen said, standing up. He is Matthew Sanders, Lucy completed with a trembling voice. My father. There were no immediate embraces or dramatic tears, just two people looking at each other in amazement, recognizing each other in details that went beyond the physical, the way they both slightly tilted their heads when observing something with attention, the way their hands, restless, sought something to touch, to feel. You look like her, Matthew finally said, but you have your eyes, Lucy completed with a small smile. Mom always told me that, but I never understood what it meant until now. Ellen, with the discretion that characterized her, murmured something about going to buy water and walked away, leaving them alone. "May I sit?" Lucy asked, pointing to the space that Ellen had left free. "Please," Matthew responded, feeling that his voice sounded strange, as if it belonged to someone else. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable but necessary, like the silence that precedes a symphony, loaded with all the notes that are yet to come. "Mom didn't tell me much," Lucy finally said, "just that you were very young and her family opposed it, that you never knew about me." "That's true," Matthew confirmed. "I found out about your existence exactly 27 minutes ago." Lucy laughed softly, and in that laugh Matthew recognized an echo of Carla's youth. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the small wooden pendant that Lucy wore around her neck. She took it between her fingers with affection. "I made it. It's a hummingbird. Mom said they always reminded her of you because you once told her that your grandmother believed hummingbirds were messengers between this world and the beyond." Matthew felt the air leave his lungs. He had forgotten that conversation, that small detail shared on an afternoon lost in time. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand toward the pendant. Lucy leaned slightly forward, allowing him to better observe the small carving. It was exquisite, delicate but firm, with a level of detail that revealed not only technique, but also love for the craft. "It's beautiful," Matthew murmured. "You have a gift." "I learned on my own," she explained. "I always felt a special connection with wood, as if it spoke to me." "I know that feeling," Matthew said with an emotional smile. "Wood has memory, you know. Each ring tells a story, each knot hides a secret." "That's exactly what I used to tell Mom," Lucy exclaimed, with an enthusiasm that broke the last barriers of formality. "She never fully understood it, but she always supported me." They looked at each other again, this time with the recognition of something shared that went beyond blood or genes. A way of seeing the world, of feeling life through the hands. "I have so many questions," Lucy confessed. "All my life I've had this feeling that part of my story was blank, and now—" "I have questions too," Matthew admitted. 31 years of questions. But perhaps we don't need to answer them all today. Perhaps we can do it with time. "I'd like that," Lucy said with a shy smile. "I have 3 more days in Santa Fe before going back to New York City." "I have all the time in the world," Matthew responded, feeling in those words a deep truth that he hadn't experienced in decades. At that moment, Ellen returned with bottles of water. She observed them with bright eyes, like someone contemplating a long-awaited miracle. "I propose a toast," she said, handing them the bottles, "to late encounters that heal old wounds." They raised the bottles, and in that simple gesture, something was sealed between them. Not a grandiose promise or an impossible oath, but something more humble and, for that very reason, more true. The shared intention to build a bridge over the abyss of time that had separated them. As the sun began its descent behind the domes of Santa Fe, tinting the sky with oranges and pinks, the 3 walked slowly through the plaza. In the distance, the music of a street violinist floated in the air like a blessing. Matthew observed his daughter out of the corner of his eye, trying to memorize every detail of her profile, every gesture, every inflection of her voice. He wondered how many times in his years as a woodworker he had carved faces or figures that, without knowing it, carried features of this woman who was part of him. As they walked, their hands accidentally brushed. Neither of them pulled away, and so, with that touch as light as the flutter of a hummingbird, they began to rebuild what time and cruelty had tried to destroy. That night, back in his hotel room, Matthew took out a small sketchbook and a pencil from his suitcase. With slow but sure strokes, he began to draw Lucy's profile, fearing that upon awakening everything would have been a dream. As he drew, he remembered something his grandmother used to say: "Nothing is truly lost as long as someone remembers it with love." And he thought of Carla, of the young woman she had been and the woman he couldn't know, of the decisions she made to protect her daughter, their daughter, of the courage she must have gathered to, at the end of her life, open the door that had remained closed for decades. Outside, in the night of Santa Fe, a soft drizzle began to fall, cleaning the dust from the streets, and refreshing the blooming jacarandas. And somewhere between heaven and earth, between past and present, between what was lost and what was newly found, memories began to take on new colors. Not the grays of lament, but the warm tones of forgiveness and hope. The color of memories, that unlike immutable facts, can transform when we observe them from a heart that has learned to heal. We hope this tale of late reunions and rescued memories has touched your soul. If you want to continue exploring stories where time becomes an ally of forgiveness, check out our special playlist here on the left. Do you believe there's always time to heal what was broken, or that some silences are too deep to be broken? Share your opinion with us in the comments. Until the next story that embraces the heart,